Many individuals in the Western Hemisphere are very disenfranchised and disillusioned with our current system. Many opponents would propose destroying the entire system itself. Their justification is the West, America, Great Britain, etc., has its current foundational position based upon the foundations of racism, sexism, homophobia, patriarchy, and so on and so forth. Basically, the only reason these countries have done well is due to oppressing other populations. And those current adjectives, according to these individuals, would describe the system to this very day. Now, I've always been about having your own opinion. I never tell anybody how to think, how to feel. I don't do any of that. However, if you were to say that America was built on patriarchy, and that to this day that is how the hierarchical system operates, to me would be a very lazy take. You don't take into account geography, history, science, psychology, or any other factors. The fact of the matter is that every society has a hierarchy. America is no different than ancient Egypt. America is no different than parts of the animal kingdom. America is no different than other continents. Even before the first white man set foot on some continents, they already had a hierarchical system in place. Society always has and will be about hierarchy. Hierarchy is a ruling body arranged in a graded series. The first thing you must know is that every system has some form of hierarchy. When you get rid of the current governing powers, the current ruling class, you create a power vacuum. That vacuum will suck in anybody who wants power. You must be very careful when doing this. Even if you have some strong disagreements with the current ruling party. The most potent example that comes to mind is the Russian Revolution. Tsar Nicholas definitely was not perfect. However, replacing him with the Soviet Union made the average Russian's life worse. More restrictive, poorer, and by every metric, worse off. You can't simply say, the current ruling class sucks. Let's get rid of them, without taking into account what replaces it. It's like that book Animal Farm. Farmer Jones was a bad guy, but when they made him run away from the farm and it was taken over by the pigs were far worse and more oppressive than the previous regime. Now that we defined hierarchy, let's look at the origins of the word itself. The word comes from the Greek hierarchs, which was formed by combining the words hieros, meaning supernatural or holy, and archos, meaning. So you combine the two words and it means supernatural or holy, the top of the system. The first archaeological evidence of the system was in ancient Egypt, after the two kingdoms were united. They organized together and they developed a system of what is called hierarchy. At the top of the pyramid, you have the pharaoh. Right under him, you have the vizier, chief minister that watched over tax collection and monetized the government records. Under them, you had the nobles. Under the nobles, you had the scribes and the craftsmen, who were middle class. Under them were the farmers. And on the very bottom of the pyramid were the slaves. The most commonly known example of hierarchy is the Middle Ages. At the top you had the kings, followed by the nobles, the knights, the clergy, the tradesmen, and at the very bottom, the peasants. I don't think it takes rocket scientists to see that regardless of continent, regardless of race, regardless of sex, you have similar hierarchical systems that exist. The Egyptians still are to this day, indigenous Africans who are mixed with Arabics, and that's where you get the predominant Egyptian race. Had nothing to do with race. The Middle Ages, where feudalism was prevalent, was typically in the Western Hemisphere. You had a similar result. Hierarchy also exists in the animal kingdom. You have a term called dominance hierarchy. It's a form of animal social structure in which a linear or nearly linear ranking exists, with each animal dominant over those below it and submissive to those above it in the hierarchy. Dominance hierarchies are best known in social mammals, such as baboons and wolves, and in birds, notably chickens, in which the term pecking order or peck right is often applied. In most cases, the dominance hierarchy is relatively stable from day to day. Direct conflict is rare. An animal usually steps aside when confronted by one of higher rank. Temporary shifts occur. For instance, a female baboon mated to a high-ranking male assumes a high rank for the duration of the pair bond. An individual weakened by injury, disease, or senility usually moves downward in rank. I was watching this program on National Geographic, and it showed these monkeys in Africa. They had their own order of who would eat first and who would get the most food based on bloodlines. There's a female monkey in the tribe who always ate if there was something left, and in many cases had to scavenge for food because she was born out of a lower bloodline on the hierarchy. They're all the same species, they all look the same. It's a hierarchical system. One of the interesting experiments I found when I was delving deeper into this topic was called the tube dominance test. If you have ever walked through a narrow hallway or aisle and considered whether a person coming in the opposite direction will move aside for you, then you know the basic principles of this social dominance test. Mice are initially trained to walk through tubes narrow enough to allow only a single-celled individual to pass through. The experimenter then encourages two mice to enter a tube from opposite ends, such that one individual must retreat for the other mice to continue. The more dominant individual will consistently force the more subordinate individual to retreat in a series of trials. This test of social dominance can be applied to successive pairs of mice individuals. It says mouse, but mouse isn't a word. In a laboratory population to determine the overall social hierarchy. Individuals with long winning streaks in the tube test exhibit that typified dominance in mice. So these experiments that are done by people in laboratories show that when mice are in a narrow tube and they're about to run into one another, the more dominant mouse will not concede to the other mouse. Even though they're the same species, they look the same. There's been other experiments run, but I won't further prolong this video any more than I have to. Something interesting is they looked into the brain of more dominant animals and found different structural things in the brain. For animals with a dominance hierarchy, the prefrontal cortex predominantly mediates social status recognition. According to studies in humans, other primates, and rodents, the PFC controls attention, interpersonal judgment, social memory, and compliance with social norms. Other brain regions that likely affect social dominance. The amygdala is responsible for emotional learning and memory, and is physically larger in people with more complicated social networks. Social reward pathways may also activate in response to winning social conflicts, and so could serve as a dominance hierarchy reinforcing mechanism. In your brain, you have different dopamine pathways. If you get a reward for winning the football game, knocking someone out in the boxing fight, being the more dominant individual, then you may get addicted to that pathway of dopamine. Like I said, this is a lot more complicated than just racism, sexism, homophobia. You got to look into science, history, the animal kingdom, and a plethora of factors. One of the things I try to do is when I have a hypothesis, I try and provide examples. Specifically, many times I'll be debating somebody and they say, I have hundreds of examples. And I'm like, okay, just show me one or two. And they're like, I don't remember, but I have hundreds. Believe me, I always try to do a good job of really showing my examples. The Ottoman Empire is another one. 4 different types of major social classes. They had men of the pen, which were scholars, men of the sword, which were warriors, men of negotiation, which were merchants, and at the very lowest of the totem pole, it was called men of husbandry, and they were farmers. The Arabic Empire had 4 classes: nobility, people that were noble in the bloodlines, the Uleum, which were scholars, and lastly, other religious groups, slaves, and the Muslim masses, the regular people. The only reason I'm doing this is to prove that hierarchy isn't about race, sex, religion, or homophobia. It's about who is the most dominant in that particular system. Even if you remove the current system itself, you're still going to have a form of hierarchy. Let's hypothesize that you totally just have a system that is run by individuals. You'll have a collection of warlords who own all the resources, and people who need food, water, bullets, and other resources will go to those people. And by default, just like in a capitalist system, whoever makes the most money gets the higher status. Access to food, bullets will make that person become higher than people with less resources in the hierarchical system. Last but not least, you also have hierarchy within nature. There's something called the trophic level. That is energy that is flowing throughout the ecosystem. As the energy flows, the sun that makes the food, the plants, so on and so forth, you get 10% less energy to the next person on the hierarchical pyramid. That's why in nature, the people at the top of the pyramid, the plants who are the producers, the grass, the flowers, they get the most energy from the sun. The people who are higher up, or the species like the snakes, the owl, the vultures, and the eagles, they get less energy as it goes up. Hierarchy doesn't take into account race, sex, location, genitalia, or any other factors. All it takes into account is this species, this person is at the top. They get all of the resources, power, and amenities. The second group, they get good things, but not as good as the top. And the lower you go on the paradigm is the less you get. The good thing about America, which has its problems, is that unlike in other societies, we don't have a nobility currently. You can make connections, you can build a business and make a good amount of money, and you can move up and sometimes even downward on the hierarchical system.